everybody. My name is Nathan. This is my lovely wife, Charla. And today we're dealing with a difficult subject. But to be
I
fair,
think that's all we deal
that's
with.
all we deal with. You know,
We never have the nice stuff.
one of these days we need to have a really nice subject, like things that make the other person smile. And that would just be so happy.
How to
Krispy Kreme.
How to show your spouse that they are the most important person in your life. I mean, those are positive.
I feel like I do that every day.
Those are
though.
positive. No, you're terrible about that.
All right, moving along. Toxic people. I want to say it's a joy to work with all of you, and our goal today is simply to help. We don't have all the answers. We've asked most of the questions, though, but we want to help. And so I want to say at the outset, and this is something that my wife has emphasized, is honestly, we're talking about toxic people, but we're all toxic.
All of us are toxic. At different moments of our life, depending on our stressors, we can all be toxic.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
So the point is, sometimes we use the label toxic too broadly. In fact, to be obtuse about it, we can be toxic about our use of the label toxic. So
It's a cultural thing.
yeah, we're not talking about toxic people simply as a way to dismiss someone or be finished with them or label them or attack them or bully them. That's not what we're doing. But we are talking about people who, they're like a poison in your life, and there's nothing you seem to be able to do to make them safe. They keep poisoning you. And so let's dive right in here, and we want to start with what toxic means and what it does not mean. And so, Charla, why don't you start with talking about something it does not mean?
It doesn't mean, when you make an error of human interaction. It doesn't mean when, I have a specific trigger point and that trigger point causes us to have a conflict.
Right.
I'm not toxic necessarily. It's a trigger point. It's something that may need to be worked on.
So some people are just difficult, and some relationships are just difficult. And just because it's difficult doesn't automatically mean it's toxic. And we probably should not rush to label a relationship or a person as toxic. It's probably something that we should be patient about. A few signs that would help, at least I think have helped me think about when a person is just broken or just flawed rather than being a toxic person is, first of all, a broken person who isn't necessarily toxic. Once they understand, they will apologize and they will show what the Bible would call fruits of repentance. In other words, like for example, an abuser may apologize after he beats you up, but that's not what I'm talking about. There is no situation where you should be subject to physical abuse. And I would just throw in there emotional abuse, but a lot of times arguments can feel like emotional abuse. My wife has been beating me up for years like that. So I don't want us to rush into quickly labeling something emotional abuse if you're working through difficulty. But I think a better word to define emotional abuse would be when someone is terrorizing you, when they are
menacing you.
They're terrorizing you. Then that could very much be something more akin to emotional abuse. Under no circumstance should we put up with abuse. However, we shouldn't rush to label people or circumstances toxic. And one of the best ways let me finish that and just say, just because they got angry doesn't make them toxic.
Yeah. So define for me, because this is a question that's very real in my mind. How do you get angry with somebody and not go over that line and become toxic with them and lose the goodwill that's going on?
Okay, well, I think about this biblically, and I think of the scripture, which is not in my notes. It's in Proverbs, that a man who is not in control of his spirit is like a city without walls. So the trick to being, I think, angry and not being sinful, which that's what the Bible commands us to do.
Yeah.
I feel like is first of all, be in control of your spirit. Most of the sin that comes with anger is when we lose control of our spirit. And that's when the worst things are said. And that's when really the devils really come out, when we lose control of our spirit. So that's the first goal of being angry. Sometimes you have to calibrate your anger. It's easy to be angry. It's hard to be angry in the right way at the right time with the right person. It's easy to be angry. I know people who live their life angry, and their kids have suffered, their careers have suffered, their marriages have suffered, but really they weren't angry at those things. They were angry at something that happened to them, something they never got over. You understand. That's something we take to prayer. I can't give you, as a Bible teacher or a Bible student or as a pastor, I can't give you a formula for figuring that out in your life. What I can tell you is this: if you will pray and if you will ask of the Lord, if you will sincerely ask of the Lord to help me understand what's going on in me, I promise you the Lord will answer that. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. And I just want to add one little thing. Just because there is an example that's been given to you all your life on how you respond in a situation, and maybe how your father responded or how your mother responded to an argument between them, maybe they were screamers, and so you felt like that's how you learned to communicate. That doesn't necessarily make it right.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily make it the correct way to communicate or the way to resolve things. Because this person that you're with may have grown up in a home where that was never acceptable. So to them, they feel like you're assaulting them when you do that. So be aware there are nuances of what one person considers abuse and what someone else considers abuse. You know, you may just be expressing yourself, and this other person feel like you are really attacking them. So that's not toxic behavior. It's simply learning each other. And learning to adapt to each other and to your own ways of communication. And when something feels like it's assaulting and feels like it's toxic, being able to communicate with your partner and say, hey, this is not okay with me. I'm not good with that. Right.
So the first point is that we don't want to use the term toxic as an excuse to avoid people that we have obligations to, or to avoid the people that we are striving to include in our ministry influence. We don't want to simply use it as an excuse, but on the other hand, we don't want to pretend like it doesn't exist, because we know it does exist. So I think one of the simplest ways to figure out if someone is really toxic or are they just broken is how they behave when you ask them to respect your space or respect your boundaries. Mm-hmm. Toxic people will explode. They won't hear you at all. And they won't try to understand. They will explode when you ask them to respect your boundaries. And instead of being like, I don't really understand how you feel. That's okay. That's what communication's for. Instead of being like, I don't know how this happened. I don't know what I did. That's all fairly healthy responses of maybe just broken people who are flawed. But a toxic person will explode in their response. When you ask them to respect some boundary, some space, their response will be, how dare you? Now will come an attack according to their personality. The attack may be guilt. After all I've done for you, blah, 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 blah. That's a typical parental style of counterattacking you. How dare you after all I've done for me?
I've taught you better than that.
That's right. With more of a spouse or more of a sibling relationship where you're more peers, it'll be more like, who do you think you are? Now comes the character assault. You're trash. You're no good. When someone goes completely into kill mode, when you ask them to respect time, respect boundaries, respect something in your life, there's a solid chance that you're dealing with somebody who is not just broken, but they are toxic. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Non-toxic people will try to understand, and they will make an effort to hear you, and they may even try to apologize. Not everybody apologizes fast. Some people apologize slow. And it's not just as simple as that. Some people apologize fast but don't mean it. Some people apologize slow, but they do mean it very much.
Utter transparency. I'm a slow apologizer. I'm fast with my kids, but I'm really slow with him.
That's right.
So
I second that confession. Lord help her.
it's reality. So,
Well, so let's ask this question, because we are people of faith, and we're not just choosing philosophy because it sounds good. We're really trying, as pretentious as this sounds, we're really trying to be like Jesus. Now that doesn't mean we're succeeding. That means he is the ideal. He is the star in our sky that we pursue. We are looking for the King. We have come to worship him. We don't know everything. We don't have all the answers, but at the end of the day, we're wise enough to know that we're following that star. And so the question would be fair to ask, did Jesus ever walk away from toxic relationships? Is there any example of that? And I would say, absolutely. I would say there's plenty of examples of toxic relationships in the Bible, in the life of Jesus. They primarily are those who are trying to harm him, hurt him. I think of one scripture that I put in my notes here, Matthew 16:4. Jesus walks away from the religious people. He walks away from them, and he says he calls them an evil and adulterous generation. And then he accuses them of seeking a sign. In other words, you don't want to hear me. You're not trying to understand. You're just here for your goal. And if you read the passage, their goal is actually to trap him, to do harm to him. And that is one of the signs of the toxic person, that they are striving to do harm. Jesus walked away. He didn't just walk away from toxic people. He walked away from people he was trying to help, but he had no more to give. He was exhausted. He was tired. He drew away. There can be wisdom in drawing away because at the limits of our ability. All right, moving along. One of the best books on dealing with toxic people that I would recommend is by the author Gary Thomas. And the name of the book is When to Walk Away. And he gives several advanced examples, I should say, of what toxicity looks like in a person. So why don't you start going through this list, and we'll.
Well, the first thing I want to say is there's no like one defining
absolutely
thing. You can't pick one of these and say, because my spouse has this, that they're toxic.
Right.
It's almost like there's kind of a pattern. Now, neither would it be all of them. So you may see one or two things stand out to you that kind of make you suspicious. But when you think about all the other things of toxic that we have talked about, it kind of starts to fit in there. So if you recognize any of these, then
don't automatically jump to judgment.
Right.
Take it to prayer. Take it to prayer.
Amen.
These are warning signs, but we don't want to dismiss, write off, cause tension, cause conflict without taking it to prayer. The truth is, we might be the person who needs to repent.
Right.
We might be the person who's living a self-centered life. We might be the person who's not humbling ourselves. Well, I mean, not in the case of me and Charlotte. In our case, it's her. But
have you ever noticed how he picks on me a lot?
Number one.
So their driving concern is themselves and their own needs. It's all
sign.
About them.
Yes. It's a sign of a potentially toxic person. And I put in their driving concern because they're driven to it. They can't make room for anybody else. It's their way or the highway. How dare you attack. The second sign is that, well, let me just say this because this is important. It may not be a toxic person. It may be a toxic relationship. Right. And one of the examples of both toxic people and toxic relationships is that they are draining to you. They're not uplifting. They're not encouraging. Right. When you leave, you are exhausted. You are drained.
And every single time you leave them, you're exhausted and drained, and you dread seeing them again. And when it gets to that point, that
it may be a toxic person, it may be a toxic relationship. I've heard a lot of times people say how much going to spend time with their family was exhausting and draining. And I knew them all, and I thought to myself that it's not toxic people. They've developed this toxic competitive relationship that they need to pray about. Right. They need to humble themselves. They need to pray about it. And they need to work on building a healthy relationship because your family's valuable. You shouldn't be quick to give up or write off on your family members. I'm not saying there aren't times when you need to establish boundaries and the like. There are times, and let's be honest, some of the most damaging relationships in people's lives are the relationships that are closest to them. So that's potential. But that was number two. These relationships are draining and not encouraging. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Number three is they always will use you, but they'll never serve you. So those are people who are always needing you and always willing for you to come help them, but they're never willing to help you. And if you're in a bind, they're too busy, they've got things going on, they're not able to work their schedule out. So it's all about them, their needs.
Right. And if you bring this subject up, they explode. 100% attack mode. Number four, they are addicted to self-righteous behavior or judgmental behavior, and they make rash judgments about people, situations they don't even know. They don't even know, but they will dismiss people. They'll make rash judgments. They need to do some work on themselves and humble themselves. In the meantime, they're going to track you down. They're harming the people near to them.
It's very common to see on social media.
Yes.
People are very, very opinionated on social media, especially if they don't know you. So they're very, very quick to give an opinion about, if you're in a group, about, give
Right.
opinions about your behavior and how you handle things without understanding the situation at all.
Right.
People are very opinionated.
Add to that, because I love to interrupt. And
you're good at that.
So
he's good at that.
It's not the opinion that's the problem. It's the assumption they make about people who don't share their opinion that's the problem. I want to make that distinction, because we all have opinions. It's not the opinion that's the problem. It's the presumption that anybody who doesn't share that opinion is automatically bad or automatically evil or something like that. And so
they're always suspicious of other people's motives. I feel like on social media.
Not just suspicious. They automatically
assume the negative. They assume
that because you don't agree with me, you're a dirty dog.
Right.
You're evil. You're the face of satanic activity, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And also, you want to talk about? You want to add to that?
I do. Yeah. Something that I have seen is people who are toxic when they argue with you. It's irrational, for one thing. Yeah, we mentioned that, but it gets increasingly accusatory, and they come back at you. No matter what you say, they're really good at arguing, and they never listen to what you're saying.
Right.
They automatically come back with another accusation over and over and over. I feel like it's like, where you keep heaping on things, and you never listen to what they're saying. You never listen to their defense. You never listen to anything. You just keep adding to it.
Just escalate
it and attack back. So that's a very common theme.
Number five, toxic people are emotional and often physical bullies. And I want to emphasize that word bully. They have this toxic need to dominate you, and they bully you, but they feel justified because they're so sure they're right. If you're right or not, you don't get to bully.
Right.
Now, don't use the example of children. Well, yeah, okay. With children, there's hypothetical situations where they don't get to argue. They have to obey because they don't understand risk. Adults, you don't get to use children arguments anymore with adults. You don't get to bully. And so that's another of the signs of the toxic person. They are emotional and sometimes even physical bullies. By physical, I don't mean they're always hitting you, but they are subconsciously using body language to intimidate you. This is very common between men and women. The truth is, men are naturally substantially stronger than women, and men, if they're not careful, can intimidate with their body language and in a subtle way remind a woman that I am capable of doing you harm. Christian men should not have this problem. We should not engage physical violence. Even in our expressions and our body language, we should be known for our gentleness. That does not make us weak. All of us should be willing to know the things we would fight to the very end over, but we should not carry that menace that malevolence into our relationships, even when we're frustrated, even when we're angry.
I'm going to leave that with you because you are a man. But yes, you get that very much. So women can be that way too. It's not just men. Some men have a naturally quiet nature, and they may end up with somebody who is very loud, who is what I would consider hush, what I would consider obnoxious. I don't like sometimes. This sounds terrible to say I don't like it, but women who have to be heard over everything. I don't like men that way either, but who have to make themselves the forefront of everything and loud and what I would call obnoxious. So there's a certain personality type, and unless you've got a spouse who is okay and can deal with that and get you, I think that can be a very much a big conflict.
Yes, dear. Did I say that right?
It's terrible.
Number 6, toxic people are often very jealous of the life you've managed to build. Their life, because of their toxicity, may not have worked out as well, and they're very jealous of the life you have been able to build. And they oftentimes are conscious in their borderline hate for you.
Resentment.
Resentment. And they need if they will pray, the Lord will reveal that to them, and they can begin to humble themselves and make correction. But if they will not pray, they're toxic, and that malevolence will just ooze out of them, that menace towards you. Why don't you do number 7?
They seek to control and isolate you. They want you to stop being you.
Yeah, really, it's dominance, and they are for whatever reason convinced that their need to dominate, aka bully, aka monopolize, aka isolate you, is justified. I have never met a really toxic person who had any self-doubt. Healthy people will take a step back and ask themselves, am I being fair here? Am I being just here? That's a sign of health, self-doubt. And it's not so much that they are not people of faith, it's that they are aware of their own capacity for error and wrong. Toxic people, in my opinion, do not seem to be aware of their own ability, their own potential toxicity, and therefore they're justified in their evil. I know that's a strong way to say it, but I really feel like toxic relationships are so damaging that people of tremendous potential are in many ways crippled by them. As a pastor, I have dealt with many people who should have had stunning potential for the kingdom of God, and they are literally trying to make it week by week because of the damage that has been done to them by people who should have been sources of strength and stability in their life, not the very personification of harm. If we feel like that fits us, again, the answer, I don't mean to be a book, but the answer is to go to prayer. God, I need healing, I need strength.
So one thing I did want to say, and you're moving on, I feel like, but one thing I did want to say about number 7, they seek to control and isolate you and want you to stop being you. Oftentimes this manifests in parents when you form a relationship with a spouse or even friendships. They find ways to disapprove of that. They decide that person's bad for you for such and such reason, and they continue to make up reasons until you start lying to your parent about your friend because you love them and you realize that this is not the person that your parent thinks they are. And you eventually may marry this person knowing they're a good person, but your parent has continued to see things in them and continue to try to make you question it. It's also true in marriages. I feel like if one person's successful in their career and maybe the other person is not, Resentments can form.
Why did you point toward me when you said somebody's not?
It's just not marriages, just marriages.
My wife
that's
thinks
all.
I'm a failure.
So the thing is like, I think it's fairly common for us to resent each other at one time or another in your relationships for different reasons. Um, but I think it's important for you not to try to isolate your your person from their other friendships, because other friendships and other relationships can keep a person grounded. Now those can become toxic, and I'm not saying they're not, but if every single person in your life is considered toxic by your spouse, it might be that they're attempting to isolate you from your friendships and your family and people who are in fact on your side. um, so just be careful of that.
Let me add one thing about that. As sad as I am to say this, I think it is true enough that it deserves risking being said, and that is this: people are very good in the dating stage to hide their toxic tendencies, and then once you make a commitment to that relationship, you discover they're not really who they pretended to be. This is difficult enough that it should slow us in our pre-commitment relationships when you're in the dating stage or new friend stage. All of that, we should again take that to prayer and Lord, help us to see this person. So let me give you some examples. If you're dating someone and you have never seen them furious, you are at a severe disadvantage because you don't know them. If you spend your life with them, you're going to see them in situations where they're furious. What do they do when they're furious? That's profoundly important information. Healthy people can be furious and not be destructive. You should see them when they're sad. Life is full of sadness. Do they fall apart when they're sad? These are all things. And so before you make commitments in relationships, and maybe I would even take it further and say business partnerships, anything where we're tied with people, it is a tremendous advantage if you have seen them in the ranges of human experience before you are committed, because you can still get out, but Lord, it's messy and it's painful and you leave scars.
Yeah.
One thing we wanted to do is try to sum up here.
Yeah, we're going over our time.
Themes we want to. It's hard to remember 7 things, but maybe it's easier to remember 3 things. And so we asked ourselves, what are 3 consistent themes that we see in toxic relationships? And so I'll do Tua, why don't you start us off and we'll go through them real quick.
Okay. Malevolence. They choose to hurt you. They have a murderous spirit.
So the reason why we say murderous spirit is because a lot of times in the Bible, you'll hear people referred to as they have feet swift to shed blood, or they murder, they kill, they steal. We don't, because we live in a civil society with fairly comprehensive laws and protections. Murder is not the problem that perhaps it was in a wilder, more ancient time. But the heart of it is the same, that willingness to harm, that word we don't often use a lot, malevolence. I'm looking to harm you. If you're in a relationship and you feel a person's malevolence, they don't accidentally hurt you. They intentionally hurt you to manipulate you, to force things in the relationship. They intentionally hurt you. That is malevolence, and it is a murderous spirit, and it is a huge blinking red light in your life. How about number 2?
Number 2 would be domineering, somebody who is trying to control you, having a controlling nature.
Right, and we're not talking about the small ways in life that we have preferences. That's not what we're talking about. So don't take this the wrong way. We're not talking about, I want to go to this restaurant. No, I want to go to this restaurant. No, we always go where you want to go. That's just life.
Or it's just the opposite. No, you pick. I picked last
Yeah.
time.
Right, that's more like us. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about a different level entirely. We're talking about a toxic level where they feel threatened by you if they don't get to dominate you. Your independence is a threat to them. I think those of you who have ever lived through a relationship like this, you know exactly what it feels like. And so if you have questions about a relationship, the best solution here is take it to prayer. Confess it to God. I'm having trouble with this. Help me to see, Lord, not just the flaws in them, but help them to see the flaws, me to see the flaws in me. And out of seeing the flaws on both sides, help me to pursue justice in your healing. That is so, so important. Number three, I think is valuable because I think it is a screaming warning light, and it is simply this: they love to hate people. They love to hate. They love to hate people. I know that's a strange thing to say, but there are people that really, really, they seem to love, how shall I say this? They love heaping scorn on others. They love being dismissive. They love
conflict.
They just love to hate people. It's been my experience that people like that rarely change. I'm not saying they can't. I'm just saying it's been fairly rare in my experience. And if you're in a situation and you have a relationship with someone and they seem to love to hate people, I would say that's a warning sign. How about you?
Definitely. I think there's people who are always bitter and they're interjecting negativity constantly. That's unhealthy, and it definitely feels like that's a more toxic type person.
Right. We all, as we started this out, Sam, look, we all have toxic elements, but that doesn't mean that we have embraced them. We all are trying to do better. We're all turning our hearts toward God and the kingdom of God. And so we don't want to be quick to judge or write off people. But it can be, we've talked about this enough, so we're going to wrap it up. But toxic people are worth avoiding. They're worth limiting. They're worth placing boundaries around.
Yeah, they're worth limiting their exposure to you and to your kids.
Yes.
If possible. There's something that and we've said this before, but if you haven't watched the other videos, you may not have heard us say this. There's a time and a place for counseling. Professional counseling can help you a lot. Right. And if you feel like that you are a toxic person, I mean, there are those personality types and you tend towards some of these behaviors that we're talking about. Maybe you don't like that about yourself, but as is often true of most people, it's very, very difficult to change yourself. Right. You have to be really driven to do that, and you have to be extremely motivated to do that.
Well, this is the power of prayer. I mean, the Bible establishes this, and it's not just from the perspective of God to us. It is I'll explain what I mean by that. It's also proven from us toward God. I mean, look at Alcoholics Anonymous, people fighting addiction. Number one is you admit you can't do it. You need a higher power. So we don't just have God telling us you ought to trust me. We also have the evidence of the human experience. Right. People, the most successful programs are when people turn to God and say, I need your help. It's super hard. But prayer, calling upon God, allowing His Spirit to come into your life can supercharge that process.
Yes. But if you're struggling with steps and ways to go and you don't know the books, obviously if you're looking for steps, you're looking for things, if you're trapped in a relationship or you feel like you have a toxic relationship with someone in your family, and you need books to direct you towards that, we're always willing to try to guide you in that way. But again, I would encourage you, pray about everything, because that's always going to be your first answer and help you to see things and get better perspective. But then don't be afraid to seek professional counseling.
Right.
Sometimes a professional counselor can hone in on a direct thing that you need to do that might make the situation better, that might help you with dealing with it. So there's definitely a place for that.
Yeah, I would take a chance and say something even stronger than that. I would say, if you are not going to pray about it, you're going to need a lot more professional help. I honestly, it's my personal belief. Now, I don't offer this as a mental health professional. This is my personal belief. Prayer does a lot of the same things that counseling does, where you get out of that trapped circle and you see and you understand, and now you're able to react logically in a smart, intelligent way. But if you're not going to have a serious prayer,
Right.
you're going to need twice as much professional counseling.
Be intent about it.
Yes.
And really want it.
Yes. Yes.
It's the same thing with counseling. You approach counseling, you have to want it. You
Right.
have to need that.
Right. Right. So I think that's enough for now. We will continue to try to help. That's all we're doing with these episodes, is we're simply trying to help people. And we love you, and we want the best for you. God bless you. And we will hopefully maybe talk to you later. God bless.
Love you guys.